Hello, hi. Welcome, everybody. My name is Gabe Lubell. I am an astronomer and a composer here in Bloomington, and I'm very, very happy to be giving a little talk here before the Bloomington Symphony gets underway with their performance of the planets. So what I thought I would do is just talk a little bit about some of the historical relationships that exist between music and astronomy, since it's a kind of relationship that oftentimes people don't sort of immediately think of existing, right? Music and astronomy are things that we tend in modern life and modern thinking to treat very, very differently and very, very separately. But the reality is that historically they actually have a tremendous amount to do with one another. Holst comes in a long line of thinkers who have thought very, very carefully about the relationship between music and space. So the origins of this are actually very, very, very old. They go way back to the Greeks and perhaps even beyond. When we talk about the liberal arts today, like in a liberal arts college or a liberal arts curriculum, that actually derives from a set of 7 different disciplines that were considered by the Greeks as necessary to pursue in order to be a free-thinking person, hence the liberal arts. They were divided into 2 sets, one of 3, one of 4. The set of 4, the quadrivium, consisted of arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. So people would study these different disciplines and contemplate their relationships as preparation for being an educated person going out into the world, capable of studying higher level thoughts about philosophy and theology. The rationale behind bringing these things all together was that each of those 4 disciplines is in effect a different kind of study of number. Arithmetic, people thought of, and still this is true today, as being a study of number in its purest form, while geometry takes the idea of number and puts it out into space. Music takes the idea of number and arrays it out through time, and astronomy brings those together. It's the study of number through space and time together. So it's a very, very deep relationship that exists. Now, the history of these things, moving forward from the Greeks, they all kind of developed independently of one another. People spent a lot of time thinking about arithmetic separately from geometry, astronomy, and music, and allowed each to develop to the points where we have them today. But the history of astronomy in particular is kind of interesting because it's tied also to a number of other kinds of thinking, in particular the idea of astrology. So astronomy in particular, right? We think of astronomy as the study of the stuff we see in the sky, how it works, where it comes from, where it's going. And in a modern sense, this is the scientific aspect of things, the idea of looking at phenomena that we see out in the universe and trying to understand what they are and where they come from. But for a very long period of human history, certainly that was part of it, but there were some limitations as to what kind of science you could do. The interest was predominantly on just how these things seem to look in the sky, how they seem to move, and how they might relate to our lives on Earth. Without a very detailed understanding of physics in our modern sense, it's a little bit hard to do anything beyond that. So the discipline of astrology really developed to address these questions, the questions that bridge the realities of what's observed in space and what's observed in the universe, and how those things can actually affect us personally. So that's the discipline of astrology. It's a separate thing. But what's kind of fascinating is that throughout time, there was not the division that we have today. Today, a lot of scientists, especially astronomers, if you go up to an astronomer and ask them if they, say, "Oh, you study astrology," we get very angsty about this, because it's not what we do. It's a separate thing, and there's nothing wrong with astrology, but it is, if it's your bag and you dig it, that's cool. But in modern terms, it's a very separate thing. But this was not always the case. A lot of astronomers who were working during the medieval and Renaissance periods, they were employed by the nobility. They were employed by people who really wanted them to deepen the precision with which astrological predictions could be made. So it's a very real and old connection between these two nowadays very, very disparate fields of study. So by the time we get to Holst, right, a long time has passed, and a lot of things have changed. Astrology has become, perhaps something of a novelty for many people, and astronomy has become a very, very kind of modern science, right? By the early 20th century, we have very good ideas about the nature of a number of the planets. We have some good ideas about what we would consider modern astrophysics, right? Underpinnings of the actual workings of stars and orbital motion. We have mechanics. So the field of astronomy is very different by the time we get up to Holst. But Holst himself was not so much interested in that. Holst was interested in this continuing tradition of astrology. And that's kind of a fascinating thing, because I think to many audience members, and perhaps to an extent to Holst himself, you can't really be thinking in the 20th century about the planets as purely divine messengers or interveners in your life, right? You kind of can't really take that kind of a position in deference to everything that was known. But by writing a piece of music, by using music as a kind of conduit, Holst is able to really kind of bridge these things, right? He's able to use the imagination, invoke this ancient connection between music and astronomy in a way that says, no, it's kind of okay to be thinking about these planets in a certain kind of mystical sense, right? Even though we know a lot about the planets, right? We don't know everything about them. Most of us, I'm assuming, will probably never leave this planet, right? So the idea of having a piece of music that allows you to think about these things from a certain kind of distance is sort of a beautiful concept. It's also a fundamentally 20th century concept. By the time Holst is writing this piece of music, there have been significant advances in the way in which music is written, the aesthetics of sound, and even in the nature of the orchestra. The piece that we're going to hear tonight is it's a brilliant piece of music on its own, but if you think about it as an artifact of music from the 20th century, it's particularly rich. At times, it bridges the connection between music that was traditional and tonal with music that is atonal and a little bit more advanced. And even just thinking about the nature of the orchestra that Holst uses, it's huge. I mean, there's no people here, right? But there's certainly a lot of chairs and a lot of stands. He used the full range of orchestral resources that were available at the time, including some very unusual instruments like the bass oboe, the alto flute, the contrabassoon, 2 harps, all kinds of things. So he was really kind of treating the music and treating the opportunity of the music to engage the imagination in a very, very deep sort of way. So in that sense, right, the old idea of music and astronomy as being related to one another, it finds a really lovely synthesis within this piece. It considers the nature of the planets in an abstract and poetic way, and it does so with incredible beauty and profoundly skilled treatment of the musical material and of the orchestra itself. And at the same time, it allows us this opportunity to think about whatever you want to think about. Right? One of the beautiful things about music is that it's, especially instrumental music like this, is that it's inherently abstract. There's no specific meaning in any sound. We kind of construct that in our minds and in our imagination. And this piece allows us to do that. It allows us to do that very well. Now, what's kind of interesting about the performance tonight is that as you are listening and as you are engaged in this process of imagining and thinking about all of these places and whatever their significance might be to you, we'll be projecting images of the planets themselves. We'll be bridging the real with the imaginary in multiple ways. And it's really all a function of the fact that Holst was capable of doing this, capable of bringing together these multiple and disparate historical streams of thinking. So I hope that as you're listening, you should feel free to let your mind contemplate whatever seems worth contemplating. The planets they remain mysterious places. There's a tremendous amount that we know about them, and as good as modern astronomical technology might be, we are still limited in our understandings, especially of planets like Uranus and Neptune, which we know very, very little about, to be honest. So yeah, I think the opportunity of this piece, the opportunity of this performance is a beautiful one for really thinking about all of these things, the idea of space, the idea of time, the idea of the imagination. So thank you. I hope you all enjoy.